The crystal glass shattered against the floor, splashing expensive whiskey across her worn shoes. The men laughed, calling her a useless, heavy pig, completely unaware of the chilling silence that had just fallen over the shadowed VIP booth. Leone Ricci, the most feared man in the city, was watching. The Diamond Club sat discreetly beneath a legitimate high-rise in Midtown Manhattan, operating as the premier underground casino for the East Coast criminal elite. It was a place of crushed velvet, thick cigar smoke, and incredibly dangerous men. For Carmela Ferrari, it was a purgatory she endured 5 nights a week. Carmela was a waitress, though her actual duties often included cleaning up the messes left by arrogant mobsters and absorbing their endless barrage of petty insults. In a world that prized razor-thin, surgically enhanced women, Carmela stood out. She was soft, full-figured, with generous hips and a heavy bust that the club's standard-issue uniform struggled to contain. The cheap satin strained against her curves, making her a constant target for crude jokes and cruel dismissals from the men who frequented the tables. But the men who treated her like a piece of oversized furniture failed to realize one crucial detail. Carmela Ferrari was brilliant. Beneath her quiet demeanor and the blush that crept up her cheeks when they mocked her weight, she possessed a photographic memory and an unparalleled aptitude for numbers. She could calculate the pot of a high-stakes Texas Hold'em game from halfway across the room. She knew exactly how much money was being laundered through the baccarat tables on any given night. She kept her head down, absorbed the abuse, and silently plotted her escape, saving every single dime to pay off the crushing debt her father had left behind when he crossed the Sacco family. Clive Sacco was the absolute bane of her existence. As a mid-level capo and the nephew of the club's owner, Clive carried himself with the unearned arrogance of a man born into power. He was a petty, vicious tyrant who took immense pleasure in reminding Carmela of her place. He called her a whale. He told her she was taking up too much oxygen in the room. He deliberately spilled drinks so he could watch her get on her hands and knees to scrub the pristine marble floors. Carmela took it all with a stoic face, biting the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood, never giving him the satisfaction of her tears. She thought she was invisible to everyone else, just another piece of trash for the Sacco family to step on. She was entirely wrong. Leone Ricci did not frequent the Diamond Club often. As the head of the Ricci Syndicate, the most powerful and ruthlessly efficient mafia faction in New York, his territory was vast, encompassing the shipping ports, construction unions, and the political machinery of the entire state. I was a man of cold calculation, a silent predator who moved with lethal grace. Tonight, he was sitting in the elevated VIP lounge, nominally there to discuss a temporary truce regarding a disputed shipping route with the Sacco elders. But for the past hour, Leone had not looked at the men speaking to him. His dark, piercing eyes were locked entirely on the plus-size waitress moving through the chaotic floor below. Leone watched the way the velvet ropes parted for her, not out of respect, but out of a dismissive need to get out of her way. He saw a drunken associate of Clive slap her backside and sneer an insult about the thickness of her thighs. He felt a muscle feather in his jaw, a deep, primal rage stirring in his chest. But what truly captivated Leone was not just the lush, undeniable beauty of her thick curves, which he found himself obsessively tracking with a dark hunger. It was the fire hidden in her eyes, When she turned her back to her tormentors, the subservient mask slipped. Leone saw the sharp, intelligent gaze, scanning the room. He noticed how her lips moved slightly as she passed the high-stakes table, silently counting the chips, registering the exact odds before the dealer even flipped the river card. He saw the resilience of a woman who refused to break under the weight of a cruel world. She was a queen, dressed in rags, surrounded by swine who thought they were wolves. And she had no idea that the apex predator of the city had just decided she belonged to him. Leone sipped his bourbon, the ice clinking softly against the glass. His underboss, sitting beside him, followed his line of sight and frowned. The underboss leaned in, whispering that the girl was a nobody, just a heavy-set waitress paying off a dead man's gambling debt, not worth the Don's attention. Leone did not blink. He simply stated, in a voice that brooked absolutely no argument, that by the end of the night, the Sacco family would no longer have a debt to collect, and the Diamond Club would be missing its best asset. Down on the floor. Carmela wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead. The corset of her uniform was digging painfully into her ribs, and her feet throbbed in her cheap heels. She checked her mental tally of Clive's table. He was losing, and losing badly. Whenever Clive lost, he became violent. Carmela tried to stay in the shadows, hoping to avoid his wrath, but fate had other plans. She was called to deliver a fresh bottle of scotch to his table, a walk that felt like marching toward an execution. She had no idea that up in the shadows of the VIP balcony, a pair of dark, obsessive eyes was tracking her every step, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Midnight struck, and the atmosphere on the casino floor grew thick with tension. Clive Sacco was having a terrible night. He was down $500,000 at the private poker table. His face flushed with cheap rage and expensive liquor. His tie was loosened, his hair a mess, and his temper was fraying at the edges. Whenever Clive lost, he looked for a target to absorb his humiliation, and Carmela was his favorite punching bag. Carmela approached the table, carrying a heavy silver tray, her feet aching in her sensible black pumps. She kept her eyes averted, executing the perfect picture of submission. As she reached out to set the fresh Scotch decanter down next to Clive, he suddenly slammed his fist onto the table, jarring the surface. The sudden, violent movement caused Carmela to stumble slightly. The Scotch sloshed over the rim of the glass, spilling a few amber drops onto the green felt, merely inches away from Clive's remaining chips. Clive erupted. He shot up from his chair, the heavy wood scraping violently against the floor. He grabbed Carmela by the upper arm, his fingers digging brutally into her soft flesh, his nails biting into her skin. "Look what you did, you stupid fat cow!" Clive spat, his voice carrying over the sudden hush of the surrounding tables. "You cannot do a single thing right. You are a massive, useless waste of space. I should have you butchered and sold for scrap like your pathetic, degenerate father." Carmela gasped. The mention of her father, piercing right through her carefully constructed armor. The entire room went dead silent. The dealers stopped dealing. The waitresses froze. Up in the VIP booth, a heavy, suffocating aura bled from Leone Ricci, dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees, but he held his ground in the shadows, waiting for her reaction. He needed to see how far her fire would burn. Carmela looked at Clive's hand, gripping her arm. The pain was sharp, but the indignity was worse. The years of swallowing her pride, of shrinking herself to survive, suddenly vanished. She was done. Carmela squared her shoulders, her generous chest rising with a deep, steadying breath. She looked Clive dead in the eyes, abandoning the quiet, submissive persona she had meticulously crafted. "Let go of me," Carmela said, her voice steady and echoing clearly in the quiet room. Clive let out a harsh, barking laugh, looking around at his cronies for support. "Are you giving me orders now, garbage? You belong to me until that debt is paid in full. You are nothing but trash." "I am the only reason your uncle has not put a bullet in your head, Clive," Carmela replied, her tone icy and entirely devoid of fear. Clive froze. The color drained slightly from his face, replaced rapidly by a violent, defensive red. "What did you say to me, you fat bitch?" "You heard me," Carmela continued, stepping into his space, forcing him to crane his neck slightly. "You have been skimming from the baccarat tables for 6 months. Table 4, specifically. Every third Tuesday, you alter the drop box totals. You are currently $2.4 million ahead. I know, because I am the one secretly fixing the margins in the main ledger, so the accountant does not catch your sloppy, pathetic theft. If you ever touch me again, or if you ever call me a pig again, I will stop fixing your math. And we both know exactly what your uncle does to thieves who steal from the family." The silence in the casino was absolute, thick enough to choke on. Clive's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated panic, which quickly morphed into a murderous rage. A heavy-set waitress had just exposed him as a thief in front of his own men and rival families. Driven by pure humiliation and a desperate need to silence her, Clive raised his hand, balling it into a heavy fist, preparing to strike Carmela with enough force to shatter her jaw. Carmela braced herself, refusing to close her eyes, refusing to flinch. But the devastating blow never landed. A large, immaculately tailored hand shot out from the periphery, catching Clive's wrist mid-air with the sound of a sickening, bone-shattering crack. Clive screamed in agony, dropping to his knees as his wrist was snapped backward at an entirely unnatural angle. Carmela stumbled back, gasping, as a massive figure stepped between her and Clive, shielding her completely. Leone Ricci stood there, an immaculate portrait of bespoke violence. He did not look at Clive, who was sobbing and cradling his shattered wrist on the pristine marble floor. Leone looked only at Carmela. His dark, dangerous eyes scanned her face, tracing the soft curve of her cheek, the fullness of her lips, and the fierce, defiant fire still burning in her eyes. He reached out, his movements incredibly gentle for a man who had just broken a bone without breaking a sweat. His large thumb brushed over the skin of her arm, where Clive's fingers had dug in, lightly grazing the angry red marks. Leone's voice was a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver straight down Carmela's spine. It vibrated with a terrifying, absolute possessiveness. "Did he hurt you, Mia Regina?" Leone asked softly, completely ignoring the chaos around them. Carmela could only shake her head, completely mesmerized by the sheer magnetism and terrifying calm of the Mafia boss. She recognized him, of course. Everyone in the criminal underworld knew the face of the Lion of New York, but she had no idea why he was looking at her as if she were the most precious, exquisite creature on earth, looking at her curves not with disgust, but with a deep, starving reverence. Leone finally turned his head to look down at Clive, who was whimpering on the floor, surrounded by his heavily armed but entirely paralyzed bodyguards. None of the Sacco men dared to draw a weapon on Leone Ricci. It would mean an immediate, bloody war that they would undoubtedly lose. "You called her trash," Leone said, his voice echoing in the dead, silent room. Cold enough to freeze blood, you put your filthy hands on a woman who is worth more than your entire miserable bloodline. "Mr. Ritchie, please," Clive gasped out, sweat pouring down his pale face, cradling his ruined hand. "She is just a waitress. She is heavy. She is nobody. She owes us money. It is internal family business." "Not anymore," Leone stated coldly, pulling a heavy silver money clip from his jacket and tossing it onto Clive's chest. "The debt is paid, and it is transferred to the Ricci Syndicate. As of this exact second, Carmela Ferrari is under my personal protection. If anyone in this room, or in this entire city, ever looks at her with disrespect again, I will not just break their hands. I will burn their establishments to the absolute ground, with them locked inside." Leone turned his back on the Sacco men, dismissing them entirely. The cold, lifeless shark eye he had directed at Clive vanished, replaced by a dark, consuming heat as he looked back at Carmela. He offered her his hand, completely ignoring the stunned crowd and the agonizing groans of the man at their feet. "We are leaving, Carmela," Leone said. "Where are we going?" she whispered, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs, glancing at his outstretched, powerful hand. "Home," he replied smoothly, "where you will never be treated like anything less than an absolute goddess ever again." Carmela looked at the luxurious, dangerous hand offered to her. She looked at the bloody, broken man on the floor, who had made her life a living hell for years. With a deep, shuddering breath, she reached out and placed her soft hand in Leone's, sealing her fate and stepping out of the shadows, straight into the protective arms of the underworld's most dangerous king. The drive from Midtown Manhattan to the heavily fortified Ricci estate in Oyster Bay, Long Island, happened in absolute silence. Carmela sat in the back of the armored Maybach, staring out the tinted windows as the city lights blurred into the sprawling darkness of the coastline. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She had traded a miserable existence under the thumb of a petty tyrant for an unknown future belonging to the most dangerous apex predator in the state. When they arrived at the sprawling stone mansion, set on 50 acres of private, heavily guarded woodland, Leone Ricci did not lock her in a dungeon. Instead, he led her to a massive master suite overlooking the ocean. The room was a masterpiece of dark mahogany, silk, and sprawling space. On the massive bed sat a row of velvet boxes and garment bags. Leone stood by the door, his tall, broad frame taking up most of the space, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. He told her that he had his people retrieve her few personal belongings from her tiny queen's apartment, but he had also taken the liberty of replacing her wardrobe. Carmela hesitated, stepping toward the bed. When she unzipped the first garment bag, she expected to see the kind of clothes society told women of her size to wear, shapeless, dark, and designed to hide. Instead, she found exquisite, custom-tailored silk dresses, cashmere sweaters, and sharply cut trousers. Every single piece was designed to perfectly hug her generous hips, accentuate her heavy bust, and celebrate the soft, lush curves she had spent her entire life apologizing for. She turned to look at Leone, her voice trembling slightly as she asked him why he was doing this. She reminded him that she was just a waitress, a heavy girl with a mountain of debt, and she did not understand what he wanted from her. Leone slowly crossed the room, moving with the terrifying, silent grace of a hunting cat. He stopped inches away from her, towering over her, his presence utterly overwhelming. He reached out, gently cupping her jaw with his large hand. his thumb stroking her cheek. He told her that the world was full of blind fools who worshipped bones and sharp edges, but he was a man who appreciated a masterpiece. He murmured that her body was a temple, soft, rich, and deeply feminine, and he intended to spend the rest of his life worshipping at it. But more than her physical beauty, he told her he wanted her mind. He had seen the way she calculated the casino tables, the way she outsmarted Clive Sacco, and the fierce, unyielding spirit she possessed. He did not want a fragile trophy. He wanted a queen who could stand beside a monster without flinching. Over the next 2 weeks, Carmela experienced a world she had never dared to dream of. Leone was fiercely protective, bordering on utterly obsessed. He refused to let her lift a finger to work, showering her with affection and luxury. When they attended a private mafia gala in the city, she wore a deep emerald silk gown that clung to her full figure. When a rival boss made a subtly disparaging remark about Leone bringing a heavy woman to a high society event, Leone did not raise his voice. He simply smiled, drew a concealed blade, and pinned the man's hand to the linen tablecloth, calmly informing the terrified crowd that the next person to disrespect his woman would lose their head. Carmela realized that Leone Ricci was completely unhinged when it came to her, and a dark, thrilling part of her deeply loved it. But Carmela was not built to be a silent companion. She was a survivor, and her brilliant mind needed purpose. One evening, she walked into Leone's private study, where he was reviewing a massive stack of leather-bound financial ledgers regarding his shipping ports in Red Hook, Brooklyn. She stood behind his heavy oak desk, wrapping her soft arms around his broad shoulders, and looked down at the numbers. Within 60 seconds, her eyes caught a discrepancy. She pointed a manicured finger at a line of cargo weights from the previous Tuesday. She told Leone that the fuel costs did not match the registered tonnage of the shipping containers. The margins were off by exactly 3.2%. It was a phantom tax, a skimming technique she recognized immediately. Someone in his organization was moving ghost cargo through his ports, and the mathematical signature matched the exact sloppy accounting Clive Sacco used when he stole from his own uncle at the casino. Leone turned his chair, pulling Carmela onto his lap. She gasped slightly, her soft thighs resting against his strong legs. He looked at the ledger, then up at her, a terrifyingly proud smile spreading across his handsome face. He kissed her deeply, a consuming, passionate claim that left her breathless. He told her she was a lethal weapon disguised as a goddess, and it was time to let the Sacco family know exactly what happened when they tried to steal from the lion. The trap was sprung 3 days later at the Ricci Syndicate's main shipping hub in Red Hook. A freezing rain battered the corrugated steel roofs of the massive warehouses overlooking the dark waters of the East River. Clive Sacco was a desperate man. His uncle had discovered the missing money from the casino, exactly as Carmela had predicted. Cast out, disgraced, and marked for death by his own family, Clive had completely lost his mind. His brokenst was set in a dirty cast, and he was fueled by a toxic cocktail of painkillers and raw, burning hatred for the plus-size girl who had ruined his life. Believing Leone Ricci would be distracted, Clive gathered a dozen rogue, heavily armed mercenaries and launched a desperate, suicidal assault on the Red Hook warehouse, intending to burn Leone's smuggled goods to the ground and take Carmela hostage to buy his way back into his uncle's good graces. What Clive did not know was that Carmela and Leone were waiting for him. Carmela stood in the glass-enclosed supervisor's office, suspended 2 stories above the warehouse floor. She was completely calm, dressed in a sharp black trench coat, watching the tactical monitors. Using her photographic memory, she had memorized the entire blueprint of the warehouse district, calculating the exact blind spots in the security perimeter where Clive would most likely attempt entry. When the heavy steel loading doors were blown off their hinges by a concussive charge, Clive and his men rushed into the cavernous space, assault rifles raised. They expected to find dock workers and crates of contraband. Instead, they found an empty, heavily shadowed arena. From the glass booth above, Carmela picked up the microphone connected to the warehouse public address system. Her voice echoed off the concrete walls, smooth, mocking, and entirely in control. She told Clive that he was always terrible at math. She explained that he had brought 12 men to a space that required at least 30 to secure, and he had entered through the South Bay, which she had specifically left unlocked to funnel him into a kill zone. Clive screamed in pure rage, firing a wild burst from his rifle toward the reinforced glass of the office above, the bullets sparking harmlessly against the bulletproof surface. He ordered his men to find the stairs and drag that fat, wretched bitch down to him. They never took a single step toward the stairs. Floodlights violently snapped on, blinding the mercenaries. Leone Ricci stepped out from the shadows of a massive shipping container, flanked by 20 of his most elite, heavily armed enforcers. Leone wore a tailored black suit, holding a high-powered tactical shotgun with casual, terrifying ease. There was no grand speech. There was no negotiation. Leone simply nodded, and his men opened a wall of devastating fire. The brief, brutal firefight lasted less than 40 seconds. When the echoing crack of gunfire ceased, the smell of cordite and blood filled the freezing air. Clive's mercenaries lay motionless on the concrete floor. Clive was the only one left alive. He had dropped his weapon, falling to his knees, shivering uncontrollably, as Leone slowly walked toward him. The Mafia boss racked the slide of his shotgun, the mechanical clack echoing like a death knell in the quiet warehouse. Carmela walked out of the office and slowly descended the metal staircase, her heels clicking methodically against the grated steel. She walked onto the warehouse floor, completely unfazed by the carnage, stopping a few feet behind Leone. Clive looked up at her, his face streaked with dirt and tears. He begged her to call off her monster, pleading that they used to work together, crying that he was sorry for everything he had ever said about her weight. Leone did not look at Clive. He kept his gun aimed at the pathetic man's chest, but he turned his head slightly to look at Carmela. He told her that her tormentor's life belonged to her, and he would do exactly whatever she commanded. Carmela looked down at the man who had made her feel like worthless garbage for years. She thought about the tears she had shed in the cramped club bathroom, the cruel jokes, and the endless humiliation. Then she looked at the terrifying king who worshipped the very ground she walked on. She felt no pity, only a cold, absolute closure. She told Leone that she was tired of looking at trash and asked him to kindly take it out. Leone smiled, a dark, devastating expression of pure love. He pulled the trigger. The blast echoed through the warehouse, putting a permanent end to Clive Sacco. Leone handed his weapon to his underboss and turned entirely to Carmela. He closed the distance between them, wrapping his large arms around her thick waist, lifting her slightly off the ground, entirely oblivious to the blood and chaos around them. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, pressing her soft curves against his hard frame. He asked her if she was ready to go home. Carmela leaned into his chest, inhaling the scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne. She nodded, wrapping her arms around his neck. As they walked out of the warehouse together, leaving the wreckage of her past behind, Carmela knew she would never shrink herself for anyone ever again. She was Carmela Ferrari, a plus-size woman with a brilliant mind, and she was the absolute, undisputed queen of the Ricci Syndicate. Did you enjoy this gripping story of dark romance, fierce revenge, and hidden power? If Carmela and Leone's intense mafia journey kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit the like button and share this video with your friends. Leave a comment down below, letting us know what your favorite moment was and what kind of story you want to hear next. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another thrilling tale. See you in the next one.